Part 1, The Reluctant Testimony. The Truth Behind Closed Doors. The marble halls of the Galactic Defense Council had witnessed countless testimonies over the centuries, but today felt different. General Thrax of the Zephyrian 4th Legion shifted uncomfortably in the witness chamber, his scaled hide reflecting the harsh lights above. The most feared warrior in 3 systems, he had never shown weakness before an enemy. Yet here, facing a panel of politicians and bureaucrats, he felt exposed. General Thrax, the Altarian counselor began, her voice echoing through the chamber, "You have served with distinction for 47 years. Your military record is impeccable. Which makes your recent report unusual." Thrax's golden eyes swept the room. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved seating arrangements, Zephyrians with their reptilian features, the insectoid Vex with their compound eyes, towering Altarians with their blue-tinted skin, and scattered throughout, the small pink creatures that everyone had learned to overlook, humans. The uncomfortable questions begin. The Battle of Nexus Prime, continued the counselor, resulted in complete victory against the Devourers. Your initial assessment rated human forces as adequate support personnel. Yet your final report credits them with turning the tide. Please explain this discrepancy. A low murmur rippled through the assembly. Several alien representatives leaned forward, while the few humans present seemed to shrink into their seats. Thrax noticed Lieutenant Beck, one of the human liaisons, quietly organizing his data pad as if trying to become invisible. Thrax's claws scraped against the metal rail. For decades, he had built his reputation on brutal honesty and tactical precision. The thought of admitting he had been wrong about anything, especially about the soft, weak-looking creatures everyone dismissed as barely sentient, burned in his throat like acid. The weight of truth. I have served alongside warriors from every known species, Thrax began, his voice carrying the authority of countless battles. I have seen the berserker rage of the Carillion death squads, witnessed the calculated precision of Altarian shock troops, fought beside the unstoppable advance of Vex hive warriors. He paused, his gaze finding the human section. Lieutenant Beck had stopped fidgeting and was watching with those unsettling human eyes, soft, but somehow seeing everything. I believed I understood warfare. I believed I understood courage. Thrax's voice dropped lower. The humans proved me wrong about both. The chamber fell silent. Even the constant hum of the air recyclers seemed muted. Counselor Yvette, the session leader, gestured for him to continue. Memories of misjudgment. When High Command assigned human units to my legion, I protested. They were small, fragile-looking creatures with no natural weapons, no armored hide, no enhanced strength. Their technology was adequate but unremarkable. They seemed better suited for clerical work than combat. Several alien representatives nodded in agreement. This was the common assessment of humanity, useful for logistics, adequate for support roles, but hardly warrior material. During the first months of the campaign, they confirmed my expectations. They followed orders, performed their duties competently, but showed no exceptional qualities. They were unremarkable. Thrax's memory drifted to those early days. He remembered Colonel Webb, the human commander, always polite, always professional, but never pushing back against assignments that were clearly meant to keep his people away from real combat. The humans had accepted their role as support personnel without complaint. The seeds of change. Then came the siege of Fortress Kaler. The Devourers had entrenched themselves in an asteroid base, position considered impregnable by our tactical computers. We settled in for a months-long siege, standard procedure for such situations. He shifted position, old wounds aching with the memory. Colonel Webb approached me on day 12 of the siege. The humans had been analyzing the fortress structure, studying patterns in the enemy's defensive rotations. Webb presented a plan. Thrax's laugh was bitter. I dismissed it immediately. The plan required a direct assault through the fortress's primary defensive corridor, a passage our computers rated as having a 0% survival probability for any assault force. The human section of the chamber remained motionless, but Thrax could feel their attention like a physical weight. They knew what was coming. Webb was persistent. He explained that humans had studied the sensor data differently than our tactical computers. They had noticed something we missed, a pattern in the defensive energy cycles that created a 17-second window every 6 minutes. The moment everything changed. 17 seconds, Thrax repeated. Our fastest assault troops needed 43 seconds to cross that corridor. It was mathematically impossible. He looked directly at Lieutenant Beck now. That's when Webb said something that stayed with me. He said, "General, mathematics assumes everyone follows the same rules. Humans have a habit of writing new ones." The chamber buzzed with quiet conversations, but Thrax continued. I had two choices: maintain the siege for several more months, losing more troops to attrition, or let the humans attempt their impossible assault. Against my better judgment, I chose the latter. His voice grew quiet. That decision changed everything. Not just the battle, not just the war, but everything I thought I knew about warfare itself. Chancellor Vex leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the lights. General, are you saying the humans succeeded in this impossible assault? Thrax met her gaze steadily. Counselor, I'm saying the humans redefined what impossible means. The testimony was just beginning, but already the seeds of revelation had been planted. In the human section, Lieutenant Beck finally allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy was about to learn what his people were truly capable of. Part 2, The Impossible Mission. When logic met madness. The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the council chamber, showing the tactical situation at Nexus Prime. General Thrax manipulated the controls with practiced ease, his claws dancing over the interface as three-dimensional representations of ships and stations materialized in the air. The Devourer fleet had taken control of Nexus Prime's orbital platforms, Thrax explained, his voice carrying the weight of recent memory. 47 battle stations, each capable of destroying a dreadnought with a single volley. Our combined fleet of 600 ships couldn't break through their defensive grid. Colonel Marcus Webb sat in the human section, his weathered face impassive as he watched his former commander testify. The scars on his left temple, souvenirs from Nexus Prime, caught the chamber's artificial light. Around him, his fellow humans maintained their characteristic quiet attention, while alien representatives leaned forward with growing interest. The retreat that wasn't. Standard military doctrine was clear, Thrax continued, highlighting enemy positions in red. We needed to withdraw, regroup, and return with overwhelming force. The mathematics were simple: attacking those platforms with our current numbers would result in complete fleet destruction with zero tactical gain. Counselor Yvette studied the display. Yet you remained in system. Why? Thrax's scaled hide shifted color slightly, a Zephyrian sign of discomfort. Because Colonel Webb requested a private meeting. What he proposed defied every principle of military strategy one had learned in 4 decades of warfare. The hologram shifted, showing the human destroyer determination positioned impossibly close to the enemy defensive grid. Gasps echoed through the chamber, even basic military students knew that position was certain death. Webb volunteered his entire battle group for what he called a distraction mission. 300 ships, carrying 15,000 human personnel, would conduct a direct assault on the platforms while our main fleet escaped to hyperspace. The human calculation. Admiral Corvin, the Altarian fleet observer, had been unusually quiet during the first part of the testimony. Now he stood, his blue-tinted skin pale with memory. Counselors, I must interject. I was present during that strategic meeting. The human proposal was not just suicidal, it was pointless. Even if they drew fire for 30 minutes, it wouldn't allow enough time for fleet evacuation. Thrax nodded grimly. That's exactly what I told Webb. His response still haunts me. He said, General, you're calculating how long we can survive. We're calculating how much damage we can do while dying." The chamber fell silent. Lieutenant Beck shifted slightly in his seat, remembering that moment. They had all known it was a one-way mission. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had volunteered anyway. Webb presented detailed battle plans, Thrax continued. Not for retreat, not for survival, but for maximum enemy damage during their final 30 minutes. They had studied every platform, every weapon system, every structural weakness. They weren't planning to live through the battle, they were planning to make their deaths count. The volunteers. I expected panic among the human crews when Webb announced the mission parameters, Thrax admitted. Instead, I witnessed something I still struggle to comprehend. Every single human volunteer remained at their post. No requests for transfer, no protests, no hesitation. The hologram showed the human fleet formation, tight, disciplined, optimized not for survival but for impact. Each ship positioned to maximize damage to enemy installations while drawing fire away from escape routes. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the medical frigate Mercy actually requested permission to modify her ship's configuration. She wanted to remove the medical bays and install additional weapon systems. Thrax's voice carried a note of bewilderment. A healer, voluntarily transforming her vessel into a weapon of war. Counselor Vex clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Did you approve this modification?" "I had no choice. The humans had committed to this course of action with or without official approval. At least this way, I could coordinate their sacrifice with our fleet movements." The final briefing. Colonel Webb stood slowly, his movement causing a ripple of attention through the chamber. "General Thrax, may I add context to this part of the testimony?" The general nodded, his golden eyes reflecting respect that hadn't been there years earlier. Webb's voice carried quiet authority. "Counselors, we knew the mathematics. 15,000 humans against 47 orbital platforms. Zero probability of survival, minimal chance of significant enemy damage. By every rational calculation, it was futile." He paused, looking around the chamber. "But humans don't fight for rational reasons. We fight for irrational ones. There were 12 million civilians on Nexus Prime's surface. Families, children, elderly, people who couldn't defend themselves." The hologram shifted again, showing the planet below the orbital battle. Cities glowed like scattered jewels against the dark surface, each light representing thousands of lives. "We couldn't save ourselves," Webb continued, "but we could buy time for evacuations. We couldn't win the battle, but we could make the enemy pay a price they'd remember. The mathematics of sacrifice." Admiral Corvin's voice carried new understanding. "You weren't planning to survive the mission. You were planning to make the mission survive you." Webb nodded. Every human ship carried complete tactical data about enemy weaknesses. If one ship fell, 10 others would continue its mission objectives. If those 10 fell, the remaining ships would adapt and continue. We weren't fighting to live, we were fighting to ensure our purpose outlasted our lives. General Thrax manipulated the hologram, showing attack vectors that seemed to ignore basic survival principles. I watched their final preparations through the tactical feeds. Human crews were making personal recordings, writing final messages to families they knew they'd never see again. Yet their hands remained steady on their controls. The testimony was revealing something the galaxy had never understood about humanity, their capacity to choose certain death for uncertain hope. At 0347 hours, Colonel Webb opened a communication channel to all ships in the fleet, Thrax continued. His final transmission was simple: for everyone who can't fight for themselves. Then the human battle group engaged their engines and charged directly into the enemy defensive grid. The chamber held its collective breath. They all knew the humans had somehow survived. Webb was sitting before them as proof. But the testimony was revealing that survival had never been the plan. "What happened next?" Thrax said quietly, changed everything I thought I knew about warfare, courage, and the nature of victory itself. Part 3, The Unthinkable Strategy. When desperation became innovation. The holographic display in the council chamber shifted to show real-time battle footage from Nexus Prime. Admiral Corvin stepped forward, his tall Altarian frame casting shadows across the projected battlefield. His blue-tinted hands trembled slightly as he activated the tactical overlay. "Counselors," Corvin began, his voice tight with remembered tension, "I commanded the fleet coordination from the battleship Eternal Vigilance. What you are about to witness defies every principle of space combat doctrine developed over 3 millennia of galactic warfare." The footage showed the human battle group approaching the Devourer defensive grid in perfect formation. 47 orbital platforms tracked their approach, weapons charging with lethal intent. The mathematical certainty of the humans' destruction was absolute. Lieutenant Beck watched from the human section, his fingers unconsciously tracing the memorial bracelet on his wrist, names of friends who hadn't made it home from Nexus Prime. Around him, the surviving members of Webb's battle group maintained their characteristic stoic silence. The first impossible moment. At 0349 hours, the Devourers opened fire, Corvin continued, manipulating the hologram to show streams of energy weapons converging on the human fleet. Standard defensive doctrine requires evasive maneuvers to minimize casualties. The humans did the opposite. The projection showed human ships accelerating directly into the weapon fire, their formation tightening rather than dispersing. Gasps echoed through the chamber as alien representatives witnessed tactics that violated every survival instinct. "They weren't trying to avoid the weapons," Colonel Webb interjected quietly. "We were using them as navigation beacons." Every shot the platforms fired revealed their exact positions, power levels, and firing cycles. "We turned their advantages into our intelligence." General Thrax's scaled hide rippled with what might have been approval. The humans had calculated that taking damage from the first volley would provide tactical data worth more than the ships they lost. They sacrificed 12 vessels in the first 30 seconds to map the entire defensive grid. The unthinkable maneuver. Admiral Corvin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Then they did something that should have been impossible. The human ships began sharing. The hologram showed streams of data flowing between human vessels, not just tactical information, but actual control systems. Ships that had lost navigation were being piloted remotely by other vessels. Damaged weapon systems were being coordinated from undamaged ships across the formation. "We Altarians pride ourselves on fleet coordination," Corvin admitted. "Our neural networks allow near-instantaneous communication between ships." But the humans achieved something we thought impossible: they turned their entire battle group into a single organism. Counselor Yvette leaned forward. "You're saying they merged their ship systems?" "More than that," Webb replied. "We merged our purposes." When the Defiance lost her engines, Captain Morrison didn't abandon ship. He transferred helm control to the Courage while maintaining weapons control locally. When the Honor lost life support, her crew didn't evacuate, they shared their remaining air supply data across the fleet network and continued fighting. The human network. The tactical display showed something unprecedented in galactic military history. Human ships moved as components of a larger intelligence, each vessel perfectly positioned to support others' missions while pursuing their own objectives. When one ship fell, others seamlessly absorbed its responsibilities. Captain Elena Rodriguez had converted her medical frigate into a weapons platform, General Thrax recounted. But when the Determination suffered catastrophic hull breaches, Rodriguez immediately reversed her modifications. In the middle of combat, she transformed her ship back into a mobile hospital. The hologram showed the medical frigate Mercy maneuvering through weapons fire, her newly reinstalled medical bays receiving wounded from other human ships. Her defensive guns continued firing even as her medical teams worked to save lives. She was fighting and healing simultaneously, Admiral Corvin observed, his voice filled with wonder. Her crew was treating casualties from other ships while engaging enemy platforms. I watched her personally coordinate weapons fire while performing surgery. The cascade effect. The Devourers adapted their tactics, Thrax continued. They concentrated fire on individual human ships, trying to break the network by eliminating nodes. It should have worked: destroy enough ships, and the coordination would collapse. The display showed focused enemy fire eliminating human vessels one by one. Yet instead of weakening, the remaining ships seemed to fight with increased effectiveness. What we didn't understand, Webb explained, is that humans don't just share information and control systems. We share memory and purpose. Every ship that fell past its mission objectives, tactical knowledge, and personal motivations to the survivors. Lieutenant Beck finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of loss. The Valor was destroyed at 0356 hours. Before she died, Captain Jackson transmitted not just tactical data, but personal messages from his crew. We weren't just fighting for abstract objectives anymore, we were fighting to honor specific people who had died for the mission. The transformation. Admiral Corvin manipulated the hologram to show the battle's progression. By 0400 hours, the human force had been reduced from 300 ships to 87. By all military logic, they should have been combat ineffective. Instead, they had somehow become more dangerous. The remaining human ships moved with unprecedented coordination, each vessel serving multiple functions simultaneously. Fighters provided close support while conducting reconnaissance. Destroyers engaged enemy platforms while coordinating fleet movements. Even damaged ships continued contributing to the battle network. Captain Rodriguez's medical frigate had lost her engines and half her hull, Thrax recounted. She couldn't maneuver, couldn't retreat, couldn't escape. So she used her remaining power to become a communications hub, coordinating the final assault while her medical teams continued treating casualties. The projection showed the Mercy stationary amid the battle, streams of communication flowing between her and every other human ship. Her weapons fired in perfect synchronization with vessels thousands of kilometers away. She turned herself into the nervous system of the entire fleet, Admiral Corvin observed. And somehow, it worked. The impossible becomes inevitable. At 0407 hours, something unprecedented happened, General Thrax announced. The Devourer platforms began missing their targets. The hologram showed enemy weapons fire becoming increasingly erratic, defensive coordination breaking down across the entire grid. Alien representatives leaned forward, struggling to understand what they were witnessing. The humans had done more than map the defensive grid, Webb explained. They had learned to predict it. Every shot the platforms fired, every defensive maneuver they made, every tactical decision, the human network was analyzing and anticipating everything. The display showed human ships moving through enemy fire with impossible precision, threading between energy beams that should have destroyed them instantly. They weren't just fighting the platforms, Admiral Corvin realized aloud. They were fighting the tactical intelligence controlling them. And somehow, they were winning. The testimony was revealing that human success hadn't come from superior firepower or advanced technology. It had come from something far more dangerous, the ability to transform desperate circumstances into systematic advantages. What happened in the final minutes of the battle, General Thrax concluded, proved that humans don't just fight wars differently. They redefine what warfare itself means. Part 4, The Breaking Point. When everything should have ended. The council chamber's lights dimmed as the holographic display expanded to fill the entire space. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood slowly, her medical insignia catching the artificial light. The scars on her hands, burns from emergency surgery performed during combat, told their own story of Nexus Prime. Counselors, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. At 0412 hours, our fleet had been reduced to 31 operational vessels. By every military standard, we were finished. Our mission should have ended there. The hologram showed the desperate state of the human battle group. Ships listing badly, hulls breached, life support failing across multiple vessels. The Devourer platform still numbered 43, their defensive grid nearly intact. General Thrax stepped forward, his golden eyes reflecting the battle display. "Captain Rodriguez, tell the Council what you told me during that final communication." Rodriguez looked around the chamber, her gaze settling briefly on each alien representative. "I told the General that humans have a different definition of finished. For us, finished means when there's no one left to fight for. The moment of truth." Admiral Corvin manipulated the display to show communication logs from those final minutes. At 0413 hours, Captain Rodriguez opened an emergency channel to all remaining human vessels. What she broadcast changed the nature of the battle itself. The audio crackled to life, filled with the sounds of combat and emergency alarms. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos with surprising calm. "All ships, this is Mercy. We've received evacuation updates from the surface. 12 million civilians confirmed in secure shelters, but transport capacity is only 8 million. 4 million people have no way off-world." The chamber fell silent. The mathematics were brutally simple: even if the human sacrifice bought time for evacuation, millions would still die. "What was your response to this information, Captain?" Counselor Yvette asked. Rodriguez's expression hardened. "We changed our mission parameters. We weren't just buying time for evacuation anymore. We were buying time to expand evacuation capacity." The impossible decision. Lieutenant Beck activated his data pad, sharing technical specifications with the chamber's display system. The Devourer platforms weren't just weapons, they were massive installations with significant cargo capacity. If we could capture even a few platforms instead of just destroying them. The implications rippled through the alien representatives. General Thrax's scaled hide shifted color, a sign of deep respect among his people. "You decided to attempt boarding actions," Thrax stated. "Against platforms specifically designed to prevent boarding. With ships too damaged to execute proper assault maneuvers." Colonel Webb nodded grimly. "Captain Rodriguez calculated that we could convert 3 captured platforms into evacuation transports. That would save those 4 million civilians. The cost would be..." He paused, looking at his surviving crew members. "The cost would be everything. The medical commander's war." The holographic display focused on the medical frigate Mercy, now revealed to be the tactical center of the human fleet despite her non-combat designation. Captain Rodriguez had somehow transformed a healing vessel into the brain of a military organism. "My ship couldn't move, couldn't maneuver, couldn't escape," Rodriguez explained. "But we still had full medical facilities, intact communication systems, and a crew trained to make life-or-death decisions under impossible pressure." Admiral Corvin studied the tactical data with growing amazement. "You used medical protocols for military coordination. Triage principles for target prioritization. Emergency surgery techniques for battlefield modifications. A medical bay teaches you to work with what you have, not what you wish you had," Rodriguez replied. "When the Determination needed engine repairs but had no engineering crew, we talked their medical officer through the procedure using surgical techniques. The network evolves." The display showed something unprecedented in military history. The remaining human ships had formed a symbiotic network where each vessel served multiple functions simultaneously. Combat ships providing medical support, medical ships coordinating weapons fire, damaged vessels serving as communication nodes. The Courage had lost her weapons systems, Lieutenant Beck recounted. So Captain Anders used her remaining power to become a sensor array for the entire fleet. The Honor had lost life support, so her crew moved to other ships but maintained remote control of her engines. General Thrax manipulated the hologram to show the final battle formation. They had essentially merged 31 damaged ships into a single combat organism. Each component vessel served the whole, while the whole supported each component. Captain Rodriguez nodded. We stopped thinking about individual ship survival and started thinking about mission completion. Every person, every system, every resource was optimized for the same goal: get those 4 million people off Nexus Prime. The boarding assault. At 0419 hours, the humans attempted the impossible, Admiral Corvin announced. Boarding assault on fortified Devourer platforms using ships too damaged to properly execute the maneuver. The holographic display showed human vessels approaching the enemy platforms not with the precision of healthy ships, but with the desperate creativity of the dying. Ships with failed engines used other vessels as tugboats. Vessels with breached hulls used their damage as improvised docking systems. The Defiance had a massive hull breach on her port side, Colonel Webb explained. Captain Morrison realized the breach was exactly the right size to dock with Platform 7's maintenance port. He used battle damage as a boarding tube. The chamber buzzed with amazed conversation. Using battle damage as a tactical advantage violated every principle of military engineering. The human factor. What happened during those boarding actions? Counselor Yvette asked. Captain Rodriguez's expression grew somber. We discovered that Devourers design their platforms assuming rational enemies, opponents who retreat when facing overwhelming odds, who prioritize survival over objectives. The display showed human assault teams moving through Devourer installations with medical precision, each team member serving multiple roles. Medics who fought like soldiers, soldiers who provided medical care, engineers who served as both technicians and combatants. My medical teams had trained for emergency procedures under combat conditions, Rodriguez continued. They moved through those platforms like they were navigating a trauma ward during a disaster. Focused, efficient, unstoppable. The turning point. General Thrax's voice carried deep respect as he continued the testimony. At 0427 hours, Platform 12 went silent. The humans had not only boarded it, they had captured it intact. At 0431 hours, Platform 18 followed. Then Platform 23. The hologram showed Devourer platforms switching from red enemy indicators to blue friendly ones as human teams seized control. But more importantly, it showed those platforms immediately beginning evacuation operations. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the conversion from my medical bay, she explained. We had detailed civilian evacuation protocols from our medical emergency training. We applied those protocols to military installations, turning weapon platforms into refugee transports. The scope of the achievement was staggering. Humans had not only survived an impossible military situation, they had transformed it into a humanitarian success. The final tally, Admiral Corvin announced, was 7 captured platforms converted to evacuation transports. Total civilian evacuation capacity increased from 8 million to 15 million souls. The chamber erupted in amazed conversation. The humans had not only saved themselves, they had saved everyone. But the cost, General Thrax added quietly, was exactly what they had predicted. Of 300 ships and 15,000 crew members, only 47 ships and 2,000 personnel survived the battle. Captain Rodriguez looked around the chamber with quiet dignity. 13,000 human men and women died at Nexus Prime. But 4 million civilians lived because of their sacrifice. That's mathematics we can accept. The testimony was revealing that human victory hadn't come from avoiding death, but from making death meaningful.